So I apologize for not being there, but chapter 14 is really important. And so we're going to go ahead and do a quick lecture on the federal bureaucracy. If you have notes on OneNote, please take those out so you can be following along. Otherwise, you can take notes or just listen and try to get as much of this as you can from our review of the textbook chapter. And so just a reminder, I kind of went through this already, but the bureaucracy is how our country organizes different responsibilities in different departments. You kind of did that research if you were here on the different departments, the 15 different departments that we have in the United States, ranging from the Department of Energy to Treasury, Education, Housing and Urban Development. And make sure if you haven't finished that, you will have time today to make sure you work on that. The bureaucrats, if you look at 2006 to 2012, this is a growth in the number of employees. So under the Bush administration and then under the Obama administration, the number of employees, for example, if you take a look at defense, went from 666,700 to 764,300. So a growth of about almost 100,000 employees. So right now, I encourage you to pause this and take a look at your individual department that you will be doing your research. And when I talk about, if you looked at the assignment, the size of the department, this is what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for the size of their office space building. I'm looking for the size of their employees. How many employees have they had? How many do they currently have? Again, this last number, the one on the right in the textbook, is from 2012. So really, you can go and do a little bit of research to find out what it's like 10 years later in 2022. Still kind of feels weird saying that. So pause here if you need to go ahead and look at that. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving on. The bureaucrats, there's really two ways to get into the bureaucracy. The first way is patronage, which is a job given for political reasons. It might be someone that they know. It might be someone that had originally held that position under another administration. It could be a promotion, someone from within the organization. And so patronage is a job that's given for political reasons. You know, some of these, if you look at these current secretaries, some of these were people that actually ran against Joe Biden, right? Some of these were former mayors, former governors, and so patronage jobs are given for political reasons. The second is under civil service, the Civil Service Act. It is a system of hiring and promotion based off of merit and is nonpartisan. And so the Pendleton Civil Service Act of 1883 allows you to find the best person for the job, and that can be through entrance exams or promotion ratings to find people that could do the job the best. So sometimes you want people that align with your beliefs, and you would hire on patronage, or certain jobs hire based off of patronage or are appointed based off of patronage. The others, though, many of them are actually based off of merit, where partisanship is not factored in. And actually, when you look at engaging in partisanship, just to see that even though we live in a highly divided society right now, the Hatch Act actually prohibits many government employees from active participation in partisan politics. So if you actually look up Hatch Act, and you could look at the Bush, Obama, Trump administration and see some of the people that are appointed under in these administrations are actually not allowed to say certain things in interviews to prevent this division between parties, although the president and the vice president are often exempt from that. So please know two things, or actually everything here, but patronage and civil service. But really the two acts here, the Pendleton Civil Service Act and the Hatch Act, are actually going to be really important to know. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Moving on, just briefly to sum this up, the personnel pay scale for government employees actually is on a scale. So based off of like how many years you work there and your experience, it's not like some private sector jobs where you can ask for a raise and whatnot. Actually, the amount of years that you work there dictate, and your amount of education or your amount of experience helps dictate your pay. And so even like teachers are on a set pay scale. And so as government employees, we operate under that. And it's kind of crazy. Like even just like thinking about my brother and I, we both started at the same pay. And in 5-6 years, he's doubled the pay. And I have grown maybe 20% more, right? And so looking at that, that is the difference between public sector and private sector jobs, which we will actually talk a little bit about private sector in a little bit. The Plum Book is the top jobs available for a presidential appointment. So this is like ambassadorships. And so the Plum Book is kind of like this like job listing site for the highest positions, appointments that a president can make. And so when the transfer of presidency happens, or in the case of Donald Trump and him removing many of his secretaries, the Plum Book is kind of like the, oh, look, there's no more Secretary of Defense. We need to find someone else. And that is in the Plum Book. So looking at the cabinet departments, again, many of you should have finished. If not, you have time to finish this at the end of class. But there are 15 cabinet departments that are headed by the secretary. The Department of Justice is headed by the Attorney General, and each has its own budget, staff, and policy areas. And so sometimes cabinet departments, they fluctuated, right? So if you look at your research, some have been created as late or as recent as 2001, 2002, right? Post 9/11, President Bush created the immigration, right, to protect from outside terrorism and things like that. Here are some graphs, charts of how things are organized, right, from the departments in different levels. Department of State, Treasury, Defense, and Justice have a really close level, a high level to the president. And some fall under, in terms of like established departments and what their roles are, some cover a wider scale of responsibilities, while some are more narrow, such as energy, education. This is an example of the Department of Interior. At the top, you see a secretary, so the secretary is always in charge. And then you have things that fall under. So when we look at the Department of Interior, they're in charge of all these little things in the purple squares: water and science, land and minerals, Indian affairs, fish and wildlife, and parks. And then under fish and wildlife and parks, there's actually like then two sections underneath that, right? The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the National Park Service. So all of the departments that you've researched fall under this. And so you should make sure that you are taking into account, and when you do your research, how are these departments organized, right? And so actually right now would be a really good time. We're going to pause here for about 5 minutes, and in a sheet of paper, go ahead and do some research on how your department is organized. Who are these people? What are the subcommittees, subsections of these departments? And what are they in charge of, right? And this will help you with your research paper. In addition to that, there are also independent regulatory agencies. This is to make sure that sectors of the economy are not taken advantage of, and that there are checks in there. And so the reason why these are important is because this doesn't have to do with partisanship, right? This is like communications, like what's fair when it comes to who can air time. And these are agencies that set rules and judge, different sectors of government. So even Federal Trade Commission, that's not partisan, right? That's like really making sure that trade between countries is fair. Securities and Exchange Commission, so that like if you ever watched like Wolf of Wall Street, where back then, or even if you think about what we learned about last year in APUSH, for those of you that were there, that during the crash, the stock market crash, right, that people took advantage of it, and these things were created to make sure that those things never happen again, and that our economy and our country stay on the right foot forward. Moving on, government corporations are business like provide services like companies, and they typically charge for them. So, for example, the Postal Service and Amtrak, right? And so these might be run by the government, but like in transportation or mail, but also they provide business-like services, right? Kind of like a private company, but they're not. They're actually government owned. So Postal Service those are all government employees, like we talked about the furlough when it came to disagreeing with the budget. And then independent executive agencies like NASA, agencies that don't fit anywhere else. They don't, and these are special organizations. Now, we're going to go into the two major parts. If you're taking notes, you need to write implementation and regulation. Bureaucracies' primary two role, their job in society is to implement policy, implement rules, implement like structure, and then their job is to regulate those things. And so a bureaucracy needs to do both well in order to be successful. So implementation, this means taking the goal and objective of a policy and implementing into a program. So when we look at the different stages of policymaking, it really is looking at, like, say we want to roll out a new type of ethnic studies curriculum into the United States, right? And say the Biden administration goes, we want to make sure that everyone knows what ethnic studies is and can celebrate and understand the diversity in America. Well, implementation, even though the goal is set by the president or the goal is set by someone higher, the Department of Education now has to figure out a way to implement that. And so they would create rules for states to follow, and they might go, hey, if you implement an ethnic studies program you will get a bonus $2-3 million into your education system that we'll provide. And so they can use incentives, right, by using the resources to achieve some of those goals. And so when we look at that, sometimes there's a failure in that, right? And the best laid plans sometimes flunk the implementation test because the design isn't good, or maybe congressional laws are ambiguous and imprecise, or sometimes laws conflict with each other, or the lack of resources. So agencies might be big, but they don't have enough ways to keep it going, right? So if they're, for example, if they say, hey, we want to do ethnic studies, and California says no, like, we don't have enough people to come train for ethnic studies teachers, we're such a large state, it might fail. And if it fails in one state, then it could lead to this domino effect of going like, well, we don't have enough resources in Nevada either, right? And so it's really important that plans that are put out there aren't like an idea that they have, but really like a plan that needs to be followed and has been double, triple, quadruple checked. And so as implementers, it is really important for them to have and provide the resources, to have and provide a good plan that can be supported. And then creating routines that will ensure that policy gets implemented. And then I want to bring your attention to fragmentation. Policies are sometimes spread among several agencies, right? And so maybe ethnic studies goes along the lines of education, but it also might be, say, the Department of I don't know, energy, right? Obviously not, but let's just say if it's split between two different organizations and they don't have good communication, this fragmentation is a crack that can break down the whole plan, right? And then sometimes if they don't communicate well, they'll have different rules for the same policy, which is going to be difficult to make happen. And so one of the more successful implementation is in 1965 during the Civil Rights Movement. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. And it was generally considered a success because it was clear, the goal was clear, that all people would have the right to vote and that they wouldn't be able to be discriminated against in the voting booths, right? In that. And so the implementation was clear. Like, you cannot turn away a person based off of their color or based off you can't give a poll test. You can't, enact any of those previous clauses that stopped minorities and other people from voting, right? And then those carrying out the law had obvious authority and vigor to do so, meaning it gave permission to those that were in the electing the booths to be able to be checked on and be held accountable so that this would not be violated, right? So the implementation was clear. It was really simple to follow, and the resources that were dedicated to that was good. Lastly, we're going to talk about bureaucracies as regulators. So they might implement it, but regulation is actually important. Now, regulation or deregulation is a debate that has been going on for quite a while. And we're going to actually spend some time examining how regulation happens when I get back. But regulation is the use of governmental authority to control or change practice in the private sector. And so the government, even though as private citizens that own private businesses, could be separate because we want as little government interference as possible, right? Sometimes it's a responsibility of the regulation, the bureaucracies to regulate for the safety of people, right? And so one example of this is a private farmer might sell food to a supermarket. The supermarket is private, so they should be able to sell if they want to, right? But one of the things that happens is, like, if you go to a supermarket and you get a gallon of milk, how do you know you're not getting a gallon of white colored water, right? How do you know that when you open that, you're going to be able to drink milk? And a big part of that is that it is FDA approved, right? Supermarkets can't sell you bad and expired things because of the FDA, right? The same way when you pop a pill of Tylenol, you know you're not taking, like, I don't know, some allergy medicine, right? And it's because the Food and Drug Administration has all these regulations, right? From literally, like, making sure the plastic tear sign is there, right? To making sure that expiration dates are followed. And how many of you have been told, like, oh my gosh, like, drink milk a day after the expiration date because it's still going to be good, right? And it's because the government wants to make sure that there's days afterwards that things are still good and that people are protected, right? So regulation is really important, and we don't see it, and that is a big part of when we look at this, how regulation affects our daily lives. And yet, how does regulation make things more expensive, right? And so all regulation contains these elements: grant of power and set of directions from Congress. So Congress might put forth the policy. A set of rules and guidelines by the regulatory agency itself, meaning like the department. So let's just say we're talking about food and expiration dates. Congress might go, hey, we want to make sure that no one sells these drugs, right? Maybe it would be like you can't sell methamphetamines on in supermarkets, right? It sounds like a duh, right? But those things were made illegal, right, based off of the Controlled Substance Act that we looked at early in the federalism unit. But they can only put together that. The agency of the Food and Drug Administration actually has to regulate that, right? And so they have to make sure in supermarkets that supermarkets will get punished, shut down if they were to sell those things. And then the means of enforcing compliance is maybe through fines, through closing things, or sometimes enforcing compliance is like, hey, if you do it, you get bonus, right? And so compliance doesn't necessarily mean there's a punishment, but there could be a supportive like bonus, right? A grant, so to speak. So regulation focuses on command and control. So government tells businesses how to reach these goals, checks the progress and punishes offenders. Again, like I just said, it might be using an incentive system. And some agencies are proactive while some are reactive. And what that means is like proactive agencies are constantly changing and moving, while reactive means like, well, when this new, for example, if we're looking at COVID and the agency is reacting to what's happening, right? There is a push towards deregulation, thinking that restrictions create more expensive things, right? Because regulation raises prices. That's why, like, when people say, okay, like, let's go to TJ to go buy some stuff, and why are things more cheaper in TJ? Because there's less that goes into the regulation, right? Costs in the U.S. are higher for drugs because drugs are more regulated, and the cost of the regulation goes then towards paying different things. And so the regulation actually really is important. Because things get cheaper, people would opt to not buy stuff from here, right? And that's why made in China, made in wherever, like when we talk about regulation of like child labor laws, why we can't have any of you work for more than 8 hours on a school day, or more than 4 hours on a school day, or more than 20 hours in a school week. That regulation, and also the regulation of minimum wage, pushes prices to be more expensive, right? That's why if you look on the tags that you're wearing and the backpacks that you brought to school, made in China, made in other country that has less regulation, because they might be getting paid cents to your dollar, right? Per hour. And so that's why it's really important to understand the push for deregulation. Not saying that it's the right thing, but there are some merits to it, right? And so the question that I want to ask you, and we're actually going to start with this question when I get back, is deregulate or regulate, right? And why? And so just make sure when you guys are going into your research paper that you talk about how your department regulates and implements, right? Putting in an example of implementation and regulation is going to give you points, and to make sure that I know you understand what those two terms mean when it comes to your bureaucracy. So last two slides, how does the president try to control the bureaucracy? And then the next slide, we'll talk about how Congress tries to control the bureaucracy. Presidents will appoint the people. So every cabinet, every change in presidency means new people that are the secretaries of those, right? And those are chosen by the president. Presidents will also try to force law by implementing policies through the use of executive orders. And like what we talked about, the budgeting, they might alter an agency's budget, right? So they might limit what certain agencies can do, expanding the military or decreasing the military. They might try to reorganize an agency. So, for example, like I said earlier, Department of Homeland Security, I think I said immigration before, but I meant to say Department of Homeland Security, was created under the Bush administration because of the need to protect the homeland, right? Congress tries to control the bureaucracy by confirming presidential nominees. Nominees can be rejected, and so a Senate is important in confirming presidential nominees. They can also alter an agency's budget. Remember, we talked about the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, working with the executive agency's Office of Management and Budget, right, OMB. And so they also hold oversight meetings, rewrite legislation to make it more detailed. And so that's it. Talking about Chapter 14. Please make sure to get your research paper done by next week. It is 3 pages. Follow the instructions. And if you're not sure which agency you are, go to my website under Unit 5, or actually, if you're watching this, it's probably right below, and make sure you are getting that in time. Okay? So even if you are absent, you've been assigned one. And, yep. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Make sure you do your citizenship and participation, which will be released Friday by noonish or morning, and do that by Sunday. Have a good one, y'all. See you later.